What's up, guys? Welcome into the Fireside Bears YouTube channel. Usaid Koshal and Max Smith here. You can follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. Follow myself and Max on Twitter at Max Smith ESM and at Usaid Koshal. Before we get into all the action, and if you want to stay updated to everything we've got going on here at Fireside Bears, and you just want one place for all your Chicago Bears news and analysis, be sure to go ahead and like this video, comment on it so YouTube pushes it out more. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel too, guys, because it's going to be a fun next couple of weeks with everything that we've got going on, and a fun summer too with all the people and things that we're going to be interviewing, as well as the content we're going to be cranking out. But Max, what's going on? Week 2 of free agencies here. The Bears were among one of the more active teams in week 1, and I think there's a lot to take away. But before we get into it, how you doing?
Doing good. You know, my bracket's not, unfortunately, but it is what it is. This seems to be, one of the more surprising March Madness. I think last year was a little less so. But, every year I make like 3 brackets. One where it's my upsets, one where it's not upsets, and then one where it's a combination of both. And it just seems like all of them are missing this year, which sucks. Usually one of them does pretty well. I don't know if that's cheating or not, but ESPN allows you to make multiple brackets, so why not? I don't know if that's cheating, but some diehard purists out there is probably going to be upset. But yeah, I mean, my brackets aren't happy, but outside of that, I can't complain.
Yeah, and speaking of brackets that exist, right? Make sure that you are going, and we're going to put the link in the description too, but go ahead and vote for myself and our other co-host Joe Herf in the Bears Twitter March Madness bracket. I'm the 10th seed right now, going up against another one of my colleagues, Zach Pearson. We've got 2 people from Fireside Bears in this tournament. Like I said, myself and Joe. Hopefully next year we've got all 4 of us in the tournament, because what a way to kind of go out that would be. But, Max, let's get right into all the action, because it's like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, the Bears are one of the more active teams in free agency. After they signed Equanimeous St. Brown last week on Thursday, hours later, the Bears signed Byron Pringle. You had Justin Jones, a defensive lineman that the team signed. On top of that, you had Kari Blasingame, a fullback. And then you had a handful of signs, basically. And El-Quadin Muhammad was the one on Friday. But the reason I bring all that up is because I think when we look at the Bears free agent class this offseason, there's 2 things to note, really. Is that, number one, the Bears are perfectly fine with going and signing guys to cheap 1-year deals like a Nicholas Morrow, because it's low risk, high reward is what the Bears are banking on. But the second big thing, and this is something that not a lot of people are talking about, is that the Bears are either going for scheme fit or familiarity. And if you look at a lot of the signings that have been made, the Bears went out and signed Equanimeous St. Brown. They went out and they signed Lucas Patrick. They signed Byron Pringle. Why exactly? Because the coaching staff and the front office was familiar with those players. You get 2 players from Green Bay. You get a guy from Kansas City. And then you have kind of El-Quadin Muhammad as well, who was with Matt Eberflus in Indianapolis. And so what we're seeing is that the NFL is a copycat league, and oftentimes when a coach or a general manager gets hired to a specific team, they often look for some of their old players from their old stomping grounds to kind of bring over and help instill a culture in a roster and in a locker room that's going to have a lot of turnover the next couple seasons.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, Ryan Poles said in one of his first press conferences that he was going to build through the draft, right? A lot of Bears are upset that we're not seeing a lot of heavy hitting signings thus far. Let's be comfortable with the fact that, like you just mentioned, and we do the official count, we're at 7 free agents from different teams that we've signed thus far. With all of the hype around names like Teron Armstead or I don't know, that's like the only guy that we've really been looking at here lately from Chicago Bears side. But without any of those big names, or maybe like a Juju Smith-Schuster, right? A lot of these other guys have been going under the radar, which is exactly what Ryan Poles said he would do, and what good GMs who are really trying to rebuild a team and from the very core will do. So, I mean, and he's addressing just about every issue that we've been talking about on this channel for well almost a year now, right? We're bringing in a fast attacking linebacker. And by the way, Alec Ogletree still hasn't been signed anywhere else. There's still a possibility he could return to the Chicago Bears if they need him. I think he fills a gap. I think he's a good veteran leadership again to add to that, especially with Danny Trevathan gone. But in addition of Nicholas Morrow, fantastic signing who can plug and play literally anywhere. He had a fantastic 2020. If he's healthy, he's going to perform and he's going to make a lot of money because we're more likely going to re-sign him. He's on a one-year prove-it deal, and I'm willing to bet that he's going to prove it. Justin Jones, right? This is another guy who – these are guys who are on the up and up with their career. These aren't guys who are peaks last year and are going to get their money and then are going to decline and be happy with that, which, you know what? Albeit good for them. Those guys deserve the money that they're getting. But these are guys who are still kind of trying to prove it in the NFL, that have shown consistently that they can start, like at Al-Quadin Muhammad, who started 17 games last year for the Indianapolis Colts, right? He's on the line almost every down. He's a perfect type of Flus guy. But Justin Jones, according to some reports, Matt Eberflus picked up the phone and called him personally because Justin Jones was about to sign with the Indianapolis Colts and said, I want you in Chicago. Here's why I want you in Chicago, and here's how you're going to fit into my scheme. Next thing you knew, 10 hours later, he was in Halas Hall signing his contract, right? That pumps you up because these are guys who other teams want. And here we are able to get them relatively cheap. These are good players for relatively cheap. Like a guy like Lucas Patrick, he's the exact epitome of a lineman that Ryan Poles was talking about in his press conferences. We shouldn't be upset at all by stealing one of Green Bay's most underrated starting, lineman, guard, center, wherever, and we bring him down to Chicago for a pretty cheap contract compared to what some other teams are hauling out for same skill set at the line. Byron Pringle might be one of the most underrated signings, I think, in the entire free agency, just because of the trajectory this guy is on with his career and how much he's going to connect with Justin Fields on the field, right? This guy is started to become one of Patrick Mahomes' favorite last resort target player. I think he was third or fourth in the entire team with targets. Of course, you have guys like Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce who are going to soak up most of the targets. But Byron Pringle was there, and he was just getting better and better and better. And then, of course, Equanimity St. Brown, not really a huge producer, but Luke Getsy likes him a lot. That's where the connection comes from. And who knows, he's another guy with a huge amount of upside. So, and of course, we actually have a fullback now, which makes me absolutely ecstatic. Even though we did re-sign Jesper Horsted, so Sam can be happy. I think we have a legitimate fullback, so Jesper can be that tight end that we always wanted him to be.
Yeah, I want to say something real quick right here is that when you look at some of these signings on offense, is especially the signing of a fullback. I mean, the Bears franchise decided to go ahead and phase out the fullback position once Jason McKee left. And for those of our younger fans that don't know, Jason McKee was one of the most consistent offensive pieces back in the day. I'm talking about 20 years ago. Yeah. Now, when ultimately we look at it, signing Khari Blasingame, I went ahead and I graded the Bears 7 free agent signings, and I said that I liked I think I gave the Khari Blasingame signing a B, and the article's on Empire Sports Media, by the way. But the reason that I said a B is simply because he's only caught 10 receptions over the last 3 seasons. I know that there was a Twitter clip going viral of every single reception that he's had, acting like he's some crazy dynamic receiver. But when you look at this offense, you look at the Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay offenses, and now soon to be the Luke Getsy offense, because there's a lot of Gary Kubiak concepts mixed in here too. What's kind of happening is that this offense is going to use a fullback. It's going to use a fullback. What's going to happen is that fullback is going to be a lot like Kyle Juszczyk, is not necessarily going to be the most dynamic player on the field, but hey, when you least expect it, that fullback is going to get a carry, because I remember playing Madden 06, and fullback dive was one of the most underrated plays ever. Now, the NFL is clearly not Madden, but the point is that the fullback's going to be using this offense. It's going to have a role. Okay, there is some potential there for Blasingame in terms of being a legitimate wide receiver, or player that's lined up as a receiver, I should say. But I also think that when you look at the Bears right now, that backfield has a lot of versatility that just bodes so well for this team. And the reason I say that is because take away the fullback for a second. You have Khalil Herbert and David Montgomery, who I think arguably can be one of the top running back duos in the league. Okay. And then you have Blasingame, and you add to that, there's a bit of a three-headed monster there. And for an offense that traditionally emphasizes the run game to set up the play action, this makes sense. Now, getting away from the fullback here, what do you have in Equanimeous St. Brown? You have a player that had a rocky start to his career in Green Bay, never really took off, and is now going ahead and is getting an opportunity to kind of revive his career. When you look at the Byron Pringle signing, he had a phenomenal 2021 season. He was an undrafted free agent, didn't really see the field till 2019, so it took about a year to develop after he was undrafted in 2018. But what you're seeing in Pringle is a perfect complement to Darnell Mooney. If the season were to start today, your number one, number two wide receivers would be Mooney and Pringle. And then on top of that, the big thing to keep in mind is that Pringle does best what Justin Fields loves, which is stretch the field as a vertical threat. He's not the fastest guy on the field. That distinction still belongs to Darnell Mooney, Roquan Smith, and Justin Fields. But ultimately, when you look at this team, what you basically see is that the pieces are falling in place. So are a lot of these deals massive by any means? Absolutely not. Remember, the Bears kind of backed out of their one big splash signing, which was Ogunjobi. And I understand everyone's like, oh, well, they have a lot of cap space. Let's throw money at these free agents. No, Ryan Poles is looking at this and saying, why would I throw money at these guys this year when I could give them a year to go ahead, show me what they've got, and then next year we decide who's coming and who's going.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the Bears are still like $27 to $25 million under the cap as of today. So there's still a bunch of opportunities for them to move, even with additional signings. Depends on whether or not they want to do that, but there's still movement. We look at, some areas still at tackle. We still have question marks there. There were some reports that Ryan Poles wasn't a fan of Larry Borom, but that they were in on Tevin Jenkins, so that they'd have to bring in a left tackle in order to replace Larry Borom, or at least kick a fire in him and have some competition coming in. And of course, the only options there are Tron Armstead or Eric Fisher or Dwayne Brown at this point. Those are the only real plug and play starters at the free agency for those positions that we know of, or at least that's there. And we've been looking a lot. And the real question mark is, how much is the front office willing to pay? Because Ryan Poles made it clear that he wants to build these positions out in the draft. So it's not like these are long-term solutions. So the Bears are probably offering them medium, short-term contracts and saying, hey, we'd love you to come here for a year or two, maybe perform, we'll give you a little bit over asking price, and then go on your way. That may not be really alluring to guys who are nearing the ends of their career, who are looking maybe to chase a championship. So let's just be honest, the Bears aren't really that attractive of a market for some of those players that we just listed, because we're not making it clear that we're competing. And that's really been broadcasted out to the NFL and the market right now, is the Bears aren't looking to compete next year. We're just not. So don't get your hopes up. If we end up having a really good season, that's fantastic. But I don't think Eberflus and Poles is sending every free agent who's looking at Chicago an agent saying, hey, yeah, we're going to make a run this year. No. We're going, hey, we're in it for the long haul. If you want to be a piece of this rebuild, let us know. But obviously, we're not going to overpay, and we're not going to sign you to a 5-year contract, because we're just going to find a guy to replace in the draft anyways. So, maybe Green Bay can learn that lesson. But I think there's when we look at Byron Pringle again, real quick, the comparison for me to make for a lot of Bears fans is, this is the Anthony Miller that we should have had when we brought in Anthony Miller, right? Unfortunately, that experiment didn't work. Anthony Miller is a step faster, and he's also like 2 inches shorter than Byron Pringle, but they're both incredibly similar at the slot. And Byron Pringle's just better at route running. He's got better hands. So he's an upgrade over Anthony Miller. And I still think Anthony Miller has a place in this league. I don't believe he's signed right now at the moment. Last time I checked, he was with Pittsburgh. Maybe there's a, reunion there with Mitch. But I just think for Bears fans to kind of look at what Byron Pringle is going to serve with this offense, he's going to be that slot guy, I think. Like you said, Darnell Mooney's faster, and I think that's interesting that the Bears have a good amount of speed to play with. They could also bring back Marquise Goodwin if they so chose to. I don't believe he's signed anywhere. He's still restricted. that's an opportunity to return some speed. He didn't have a bad season at all. His hands are still there. The speed is still there. He's as advertised. So that's an opportunity for a wide receiver as well. But I still think the Bears might use that 38th pick either at the tackle or at a wide receiver. And then think about the fact that we still have one in the late 40s and we have a glaring issue at cornerback and we haven't signed a single DB yet. And I think that's something that we need to keep an eye on is look at our DB depth chart right now. Who's there outside of Justin Jefferson, right? Justin Jefferson, Jalen Johnson. Sorry. Who's there outside of Jalen Johnson? Like that's it, really. I mean, we lost Artie Burns. We lost Teez Tabor. Oh, wow. Those are huge kicks in the gut, right? I mean, Teez was a great special teams guy. But, I mean, that's about it. We brought back DeAndre Houston-Carson, who, by the way, I think should get this starting nod this season just because of how much he's put into this team and how much he performs every time he's out on the field. For some reason, he never got the starting look. I think he should at least get a second look there. But really, look at what we've done in the D-back position this year. And like you said, for multiple episodes, Eberflus builds backs with what he's given, right? He's known to be the guy to get the most out of his cornerbacks. And that's what the Colts did. That's what we're expecting to do here. But it's hard for me to believe that without us at least trying to bring in some talent. Definitely going to come in the draft. Without a single doubt, it's going to come in the draft. The question is, are we going to bring in some sort of veteran leadership outside of the coaching staff that we've assembled to support this position?
Yeah, look, when you continue to look at this as I monitor the Bears Twitter March Madness bracket here, which is clearly more intense than the actual March Madness, I'm getting bodied right now. So seriously, guys, go vote for me. But the point I think is this, is you look at a signing like an El-Quadin Muhammad, right? And it may not be the hottest name on the planet. I know a lot of people kind of watching this were like, wait, who even? But when you do the work that we do, you kind of have to keep a tab on all the teams out there, all the players. You just have to know who fits where. You know, for Chicago, I mean, they're looking at this and basically saying, with the signing of Muhammad and Jones, you don't pay those guys 2 years, $10 million, and then 2 years, $12 million, and expect them to just sit on the bench. Okay, $6 million for a backup is incredibly expensive. Okay, unless you're a Chase Daniel or Nick Foles, which the Bears are just the one franchise I know that loves to overpay backup quarterbacks. But the point is just the fact that I think the Bears defensive line is set. Okay. I think when you look at Quadin Muhammad and Jones, you combine that with Trevis Gibson, who, if you didn't know, was a 4-3 defensive end at Tulsa. Robert Quinn's best football also came as a 4-3 defensive end with the Rams. The D-line seems to be set. Now it's kind of building up that second and third level of the defense. And I understand that there's a lot of potential there regarding Thomas Graham Jr. And I certainly think that all that is warranted because I see Thomas Graham Jr. becoming a versatile chess piece that you can kind of move around just because he has the ability to play effectively in man or zone. He has the ability to play on the boundaries or move inside the numbers, kick into the slot. He certainly has the makeup of a modern day strong safety in the NFL to attack people downhill. Now, I think my bigger concern is the linebackers, and that's where Nicholas Morrow kind of comes in because we know we have the will linebacker in this defense. That's going to be Roquan Smith, who pretty much is going to be Lance Briggs. Okay. Then what you're going to have is a Mike and a Sam linebacker. Now, your Mike linebacker was pretty much Brian Urlacher or Ray Lewis. Okay. It's got to be a big physical player, 6'3, 6'4, 6'5, hard hitter that can hold up in coverage, but also stop the run. Okay. And then you're going to have your Sam linebacker, which is the easiest way to describe it, is pretty much Hunter Hillenmeyer. Okay. And if you remember Hunter Hillenmeyer back in the day, he was not a star player by any means, but he was certainly good enough to get it done. Okay. Now, for me, right, the big thing comes down to, like you mentioned, the draft. If I'm looking at that second round, there's 3 possible combinations. I see the Bears going wide receiver, offensive line, cornerback, or wide receiver. And I don't see the Bears basically doubling down on any position besides offensive line or wide receiver, specifically because those are some of the most critical positions with the way the NFL is transitioning. You know, defensive line, linebacker, outside linebacker, safety, cornerback, those would all be great, but let's be real. As I've mentioned before, Eberflus's track record has shown he's going to get it done. It doesn't matter where you're drafted in terms of the defensive guys.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have first round. Obviously, we have two, 38, 40, thanks to the trade with Khalil Mack, which again, I still don't hate. They're just browsing again the roster as it stands right now, and it's still way too early because we're not even done with free agency, and we're, I guess, almost a month away from the draft. There's some returning faces. I mean, say what you want about Kindle Wilder, I still think there's some talent there. Duke Shelley's back. A lot of guys who were special teams like outstanding performers or depth outstanding performers over the past couple of years are going to be expected to step up and play into these roles that I think that the scheme will allow them to. At linebacker, the issue that I think that we were finding is that the majority, like you said, there's a big issue at linebacker, but a majority of the linebackers that we've brought in over the past few years have been designated for that 3-4. So they're more pass rushers than they are pure linebackers, which is what Eberflus needs, right? So, for example, you're Caleb Johnson, who's essentially an outside linebacker, who's basically a glorified pass rusher. We don't necessarily need that in a 4-3, right? Unless he's going to play the end, which if he wants to put his hand in the dirt, if he's good enough, go ahead, let's do that, right? That's not the same anymore. So we have a bunch of linebackers on our roster that aren't Mike Will or Sam's, that aren't your traditional 4-3, unless they play that in college. With 100%, they probably did play it in college, and were asked to switch it up here in the professional league. But guys like you mentioned, like Robert Quinn, who's technically a linebacker, will return to his natural position as a defensive end, right? That's something that I think we need to recognize is there's a lot of guys on this roster that aren't linebackers, that may be defensive ends, but we're just going to have to see who can perform where. There's so much evaluation for this training camp, and I think we need to start talking about how just important this training camp is going to be. Like, we're still pretty far away from it, guys, but let's just put a pin in it now and go, how important this whole free agency stuff. Okay, cool. We're bringing in some talent. All right, whatever. The draft. All right, cool. We bring in some new talent. All right, whatever. Training camp is really going to be important because that's when the real evaluation happens. When outside of just watching tape and going, you know what, I think this guy's going to fit here, or maybe it's going to fit here. No, we're going to actually see whether or not these guys can play in that scheme. And then things are going to get really interesting roster-wise.
Yeah, looking at, the current makeup of the roster as we kind of begin to wrap up here, there's something to be said is that after the NFL draft and going into training camp, fully expect the Bears to be one of the youngest teams in the NFL average age-wise, because I could certainly see Ryan Poles going absolutely crazy with a lot of these undrafted free agent signings, just hoping to find a couple hidden gems, which would bode very well for the Bears moving forward in terms of cap purposes. And then just number two, there's something to kind of be said, is just the fact that ultimately the training camp's not just going to be important because it's going to be getting ready for the season. It's going to be important because it's going to be the first time we kind of get an extended look at this team over a course of days and weeks. And, training camp at Halas Hall, I can tell you guys right now, I was there last year. It was real nice Halas Hall, beautiful facility. So shout out to Ryan Pace as well as Matt Nagy for upgrading Halas Hall and giving the Bears Justin Fields, which, side note, I should say, and a lot of people aren't going to like me saying this, is that Ryan Poles' full evaluation as a general manager is going to be a bit skewed unless he has to select a quarterback in the first round some point over the next couple of years. Never going to be the case, hopefully, but you just never know. But thank you, Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, for leaving the Bears with the best parting gift on the planet. But this training camp is going to be incredibly important because we're going to get an opportunity to see what's going to stick in 2022 and what's not going to stick. But we also have to acknowledge that what happens in July is going to be very different from what happens in August, September, October, November, December, and January. But we're going to see the foundation being laid for the Bears. And these free agent signings over the last couple of weeks show that. But the real foundation is going to start to be laid if Poles sticks true to his guts and true to his draft and develop philosophy. You're muted.
Yeah, that age part is absolutely crucial. Currently, there's only 5 players over the age of 30 on the roster. So it's clear that this is going to be one of the younger teams in the league, and that's kind of what you want. Like, we kind of have a head start on, like I said, this is like a soft rebuild. It's not like we're completely shipping everybody off and wiping the slate clean. Like, no, there's talent here, and there's young talent here, and there's a lot of youth here. We just need to provide them with the opportunity to grow into the scheme, right? This is a long-term solution. Instead of just a quick fix, and we'll kick the can down the road and see what happens. But there's a good amount of guys specifically who are in that younger half that are really the core, right? Like Darnell Mooney, who's David Montgomery, who's 24. Sure, I don't know, the average lifespan of RBs is younger. But still, he's only 24 years old. Tevin Jenkins, 24. Travis Gibson, 24. Cole Kmet, 23. Right? Khalil Herbert, 23. Justin Fields just turned 23 like 2 weeks ago. Jalen Johnson's 22. Like, these are young, good guys, and they're in their early 20s who are going to be playing for this team for a long time. So I'm starting to get this vibe that we're kind of looking again at an early 2000s Chicago Bears, where there's a lot of really good young talent that just needs a few years and the right staff around them to develop them into a powerhouse like we saw in the mid to late 2000s.
Yeah, and what's going to be the difference between the past powerhouses and this powerhouse is that we hope becomes a powerhouse, because you can never be too sure of anything the Bears are doing right now, is just the fact that this powerhouse is hopefully going to have a big-time franchise quarterback, and that big-time franchise quarterback is going to be the centerpiece of a team that's going to be competitive in a league that's being driven by 2 things: elite quarterbacks and great offensive play.
Yeah. We don't have Rex Grossman anymore, right? Which was our Achilles heel for that team. That could have been, but I think this team's a bit more balanced on the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. Instead of having one of the best defenses in the past, 2 decades, we have a really good offense and a really good serviceable defense. And I also want to bring out the fact that Roquan Smith's only 24 years old. I feel like he's got to be way older, because how long he's been on this team, I guess, was 4 or 5 years now. But yeah, no, he's only 24. So again, that's what we were saying, how attractive this roster is for the younger players, as well as executives, staff, coaches, because there's just a ball of clay you can mold into whatever you want here. And we're starting to see the foundations of that.
Yes, we certainly are. Anyways, guys, this Bears Twitter March Madness bracket is getting extremely competitive. So for the final time, and I promise I will shut up about it after this, but go ahead and vote for me as well as Joe Herf. We're going to link the tweets in this description video, and also it's like a 24-hour poll, so please go ahead and vote. But before you do that, guys, make sure you subscribe, like, commented to the YouTube channel, like, subscribe, comment on this video. Make sure you're following myself and Max on Twitter at MaxSmithESM and at Usaid Koshul. A lot of Max's tweets, just saying, by the way, are not serious right now, because he's totally on board with overpaying players like Janoris Jenkins and just buying the Bears' way back into contention. Would not be bad, by the way, to bring in Jackrabbit to be a ideal mentor for this young defensive back room. But make sure you're following us on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at Fireside Bears. We'll probably be back late Thursday night with another video. If not, then I have no idea when we're going to see you next, because I have to go see my brother next weekend, and I'm not going to waste time recording. So peace out, guys. Have a good one. Bear down. And yeah, temper your expectations for Ryan Poles, and be sure you're thanking Ryan Pace every day for Justin Fields.